Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. You've heard of the Navajo Code Talkers, whose secret language baffled enemy forces during World War II. But few people know that Cree speakers from Canada also played a covert role in the same global conflict. These Indigenous men, fluent in their native tongue, were quietly enlisted by the Canadian military to send coded messages that were virtually impossible for the enemy to understand or decode. Their language, rich in complexity and entirely unfamiliar to Axis intelligence, became a powerful tool on the battlefield. During a time when secure communication was critical to victory, traditional encryption methods were constantly under threat of being cracked. Military strategists realized that Indigenous languages, rarely written down and even more rarely understood outside their communities, offered a natural solution. Just like their Navajo counterparts in the U.S., Cree speakers were recruited to transmit vital information, coordinates, troop movements, and supply updates over radio and telephone lines. Their spoken codes, sometimes modified with military terminology, allowed for real-time communication without the need for mechanical encryption devices, which were often slow and vulnerable. Yet unlike the celebrated Navajo Code Talkers, the Cree Code Talkers remained largely in the shadows. Their contributions were kept secret during the war and went unrecognized for decades afterward. Many of them returned home in silence, their roles unacknowledged even within their own communities. But today, their story is beginning to emerge, a powerful testament to how Indigenous knowledge, culture, and resilience played an unheralded role in securing victory. This story isn't just about warfare. It's about recognition, historical justice, and honoring those who served in silence to protect nations that didn't always protect them. Code Talker was a military communicator who used a native or Indigenous language to transmit coded messages during wartime, most notably in World War II. These individuals played a crucial role in ensuring that sensitive information, such as battlefield orders, troop movements, and supply logistics, could be delivered quickly and securely without being intercepted or deciphered by enemy forces. Unlike mechanical encryption devices, which could be slow or susceptible to being cracked, Code Talkers relied on the complexity and obscurity of their native languages as a form of real-time encryption. The decision to use Indigenous languages was both strategic and innovative. Many of these languages had no formal written structure and were only spoken by members of specific communities. This made them virtually impossible for enemy cryptographers to decode. Languages like Cree, Navajo, Choctaw, and Comanche were unintelligible to outside listeners, especially given their unique grammar, phonetics, and dialect variations. In addition, Indigenous languages often lacked direct translations for military terms, requiring code talkers to invent new expressions or adapt cultural metaphors, making the code even harder to understand by anyone unfamiliar with the language and its context. During World War II, secure communication was one of the most critical and difficult aspects of military operations. In both the Pacific and European theaters, radio transmissions were constantly monitored by Axis forces looking to intercept Allied plans. Any delay or breach in secure messaging could lead to ambushes, failed operations, or heavy casualties. Traditional cipher machines like the Enigma and Sagaba were useful, but they could be labor-intensive and time-consuming to use. Human code talkers, by contrast, could quickly send and receive messages in real time, dramatically increasing the efficiency and security of battlefield communications. In this environment, the use of Indigenous code talkers became a tactical advantage. Their ability to send unbreakable messages on the fly provided Allied commanders with a trusted means of coordination, especially during intense, fast-moving operations. While the Navajo are the most well-known for their role in the Pacific, Cree speakers and other Indigenous individuals in Canada quietly fulfilled similar functions in Europe, contributing to victory in ways that have only recently begun to receive the recognition they deserve. The Cree Code Talkers were Indigenous men from Canada, primarily Cree-speaking communities across the prairies and the north, who were quietly recruited by the Canadian and British military during World War II. Their selection was not random. Military officials recognized that the Cree language, with its complex syntax, unique pronunciation, and limited exposure outside of Indigenous communities, could serve as a natural cipher in battlefield communications. Fluent in both Cree and English, These men were ideal for translating military commands into a spoken code that enemy forces had virtually no chance of understanding. Recruitment often took place informally or through military enlistment drives targeting Indigenous communities. Some Cree men volunteered out of patriotism or the promise of steady pay, while others were drafted or encouraged by local officials. Unlike the Navajo Code Talkers in the U.S., who underwent specialized training and operated as part of a formal program, the Cree Code Talkers were often embedded directly into Canadian or British signal units without fanfare. Their role remained largely classified during the war, and they were not allowed to speak of their duties, even to their families, upon returning home. One of the key reasons the Cree Code Talkers remain less known today is the disparity in recognition between Canadian and American military narratives. The Navajo Code Talkers were celebrated in documentaries, books, and major Hollywood films like WWII Talkers, which brought their story to a global audience. In contrast, Cree involvement has been underrepresented in Canadian history books, media, and public commemoration. The lack of official documentation and the secrecy surrounding their missions also contributed to their historical invisibility. This silence was further compounded by systemic racism and colonial policies in Canada that marginalized Indigenous contributions. While American Code Talkers were eventually honored with medals and public ceremonies, many Cree veterans returned to their communities without acknowledgement or support. Their stories, passed down quietly through oral tradition or rediscovered in military archives decades later, are only now gaining the attention they deserve. The Cree Code Talkers stand as a powerful example of bravery and linguistic brilliance in the face of both wartime danger and cultural erasure. During World War II, Cree Code Talkers were deployed to serve in communications roles, where their native language was used to transmit secure tactical information across the battlefield. These messages, spoken in Cree, were relayed over radios and telephone lines, primarily by Canadian and British forces operating in Europe. The language's obscurity and oral tradition meant that enemy forces had virtually no way of intercepting or decoding the content, giving the Allies a vital edge in rapid, secure communication, especially during high-pressure operations. The Cree language was not simply spoken casually. It was carefully adapted to military use. Cree Code Talkers often had to invent or reinterpret words that didn't exist in their traditional vocabulary. For instance, military terms such as tank, bomber, or ammunition dump had no direct translation in Cree. To solve this, the Code Talkers used metaphors or descriptive phrases rooted in Cree culture. A tank might be referred to as a big iron turtle or armored car, while a plane might be described as a metal bird or spirit that flies. These creative interpretations ensured the message remained clear to fellow speakers while remaining incomprehensible to enemy ears. Though few specific examples of these coded messages have been preserved, some veterans and their descendants have recalled bits and fragments. In one known case, a Cree message was translated roughly to, "Three metal birds coming from the west, bring fire to the trees," meaning an airstrike was inbound. These poetic, metaphorical codes were not only linguistically clever, but also quick to deliver in the heat of battle, making them a trusted tool for commanders coordinating attacks or defense strategies. Despite their usefulness, much of the Cree Code Talkers' work remains unrecorded in official history. Many of their missions were classified and their involvement was kept secret for decades, both by the military and by the veterans themselves, who had been sworn to silence. As a result, there are very few surviving documents, recordings, or reports confirming their actions in the field. This absence of archival evidence has made it difficult for historians to fully reconstruct their contributions or give them the recognition they deserve. The secrecy surrounding their service, combined with the broader neglect of Indigenous military history in Canada, has meant that the Cree Code Talkers became ghosts in their own story. Only recently have scholars, family members, and advocacy groups begun to piece together the truth from oral accounts and military hints scattered across decades. Their role, though shrouded in mystery, remains an essential and heroic chapter in Canada's wartime legacy. One of the few Cree Code Talkers whose story has come to light is Charles Checker Tomkins, a Métis man from Grouard, Alberta. Born in 1918, Tomkins grew up speaking Cree fluently alongside English and French. His deep knowledge of the language and his bilingualism would make him a perfect fit for the Canadian military's covert communications work during World War II. When he enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force, Tomkins was soon assigned to special duties involving the translation and transmission of classified messages using the Cree language. During his military service, Tomkins worked on encoding tactical information into Cree for use by Allied forces, a task that required both linguistic precision and quick thinking. He helped develop terminology for complex military concepts that didn't exist in Cree, coining metaphorical phrases that could be quickly understood by fellow speakers while being impenetrable to any enemy listener. Though his exact missions remain classified or undocumented, his role as a code talker placed him at the heart of secure Allied communications. Like many of his peers, Tomkins was sworn to secrecy and rarely spoke about his work until decades later. After the war, Tomkins returned to civilian life in Alberta, working as a farmer and remaining active in his community. For much of his life, he kept his wartime experiences hidden, not out of shame, but due to the military's secrecy and the lack of public interest in Indigenous contributions at the time. It wasn't until the early 2000s that his story began to receive recognition. He was featured in interviews and eventually became the focus of the short documentary Cree Code Talker by the National Film Board of Canada. In it, Tomkins reflects on his service with quiet dignity and pride, offering rare insight into a long-buried chapter of history. Archived footage from the film shows Tomkins discussing the improvisational nature of his work, how they had to develop new Cree phrases on the fly to keep up with the demands of battlefield communication. His calm voice and steady manner make it clear he understood the weight of what he had been entrusted with, even if few others at the time did. Today, his descendants and community members speak of him with deep respect, recognizing the importance of both his linguistic gift and his role in a story that was almost lost. Charles Checker Tomkins is more than a war hero. He is a bridge between cultures, a symbol of how Indigenous knowledge and language were used to protect a country that, in many ways, had marginalized his people. His legacy stands not only as a reminder of the strategic brilliance behind code talking, but also as a call to honor those whose stories have long gone untold. For decades after World War II, the contributions of the Cree Code Talkers remained, largely unknown, buried under layers of military secrecy and historical neglect. Unlike their American counterparts, such as the Navajo Code Talkers, who were publicly celebrated and honored beginning in the 1970s, Cree veterans in Canada received no formal recognition for their unique and vital wartime role. It wasn't until the early 21st century that their stories began to surface, often through grassroots efforts by family members, Indigenous communities, and a handful of dedicated researchers who refused to let these voices be forgotten. The delayed acknowledgement was due in part to the classified nature of their missions, but it also reflected a broader issue within Canadian history: the systemic underrepresentation of Indigenous contributions to national narratives. Veterans like Charles Checker Tomkins spent most of their lives in quiet anonymity, their roles unspoken even within their own families. It was only through interviews in their later years, often prompted by historians or documentary filmmakers, that their experiences began to gain the attention they deserved. The Canadian government has since made modest efforts to recognize their service, but many feel the gesture comes far too late. In recent years, there has been a growing push to preserve and honor this overlooked chapter of history. Documentaries like Cree Code Talker by the National Film Board of Canada have brought personal stories to life, allowing a wider audience to understand the depth and importance of these contributions. Educational programs, museum exhibits, and classroom initiatives now include segments on Indigenous code talkers, ensuring that future generations learn about this remarkable intersection of language, culture, and military history. Academic research has also begun to explore how these linguistic strategies worked and how they impacted wartime communication strategies. The cultural significance of the Cree Code Talkers story goes beyond their role in winning battles. It speaks to the enduring strength and value of Indigenous languages and knowledge systems. In a time when many Indigenous languages are at risk of disappearing, this story offers a powerful reminder of their relevance and resilience. These languages, once suppressed by colonial education systems, were later used to protect entire nations, An irony that underscores both their power and their importance. For Indigenous communities today, the story of the Code Talkers is a source of pride and a call to action. To revitalize their languages, preserve their oral histories, and ensure that stories like this are never forgotten again. Ultimately, the legacy of the Cree Code Talkers is not just about war, it's about recognition, respect, and the reclaiming of a rightful place in the fabric of national memory. Their courage helped shape the outcome of a global conflict, and their voices, once silenced, are now being heard again with the clarity and honor they always deserved. The story of the Cree Code Talkers stands as one of the most powerful yet overlooked chapters of World War II history. These brave men used their ancestral language not just as a means of communication, but as a weapon, confounding enemy forces and safeguarding Allied missions with codes that could not be broken. Though long unrecognized, their contributions were vital to the war effort, and their silence was a mark of duty, not insignificance. By sharing their story, we not only honor their courage but also affirm the immense value of Indigenous knowledge and the resilience of Cree culture. These men served a country that often ignored them, yet they did so with pride, skill, and integrity. Their legacy is a call to remember the many unsung heroes who shaped history from the shadows. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how many other hidden figures remain forgotten in the margins of history. Help us bring them to light. Like this video, leave a comment telling us what untold stories you'd like to hear next, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of the past.